Speaker, Mr. President Pro Tem, members of the committee, let me thank you for holding this joint conference. Members, you know, I'm not confused about what the problem is. I don't know whether or not you're confused or not, but I'm not confused. I do think there's a question that needs to be asked, and what I heard today was the sooner we do it, the better off everyone will be. I'm appreciative of the fact that Mr. Harmon talked about the CPR. I'm not talking about the CPR that you do with a cardiorespiratory kind of situation. I'm talking about a CPR for the state of California. Mr. President Pro Tem and Madam Speaker, I would suggest that we take, and you know, by the way, there's a curse.
Is there a question here?
There's going to be one, yes, sir, as soon as I get to it.
Sooner, please.
I don't know whether or not any of you remember this document or not. The question is whether you do. This would be an excellent place for us to start, Mr. President Pro Tem, and that is to, in fact, begin tomorrow and begin to go over this line item by line item. Let me tell you what it says if you have forgotten. Perhaps you haven't forgotten, but it says there's $35 billion here over the next 5 years. And so, Mr. President Pro Tem, I would ask, where are we going to start? Where are we going to start? And my recommendation is that we start on this CPR that was done in 2004, when you could see the problem there. Thank you, Mr. President Pro Tem and Madam Speaker, for holding this conference.
Do I get to have a senator ask a question now? Sorry? Okay. Senator Wolk.
Thank you very much, Mr. Steinberg. I want to ask the Treasurer, in addition to the transportation and education projects that you were expenditures that you were talking about, there are certainly a number of expenditures from 1E and 84 involving flood protection and the water system, including an $800 million approval of a bill that we did in the legislature at the end of August for increased expenditures in this area. What I want to know is what is going to happen to the existing and ongoing projects that are going on for flood protection and the $800 million that we authorized to be sold.
If they are in the pipeline of projects that requires the state agency implementing them to come and borrow from pooled money to have the funds to make those expenditures, they're shut down, whatever department they're in. If there's some special appropriation that's already been made, and I don't know the status of the specific ones, I only know the general rule is 9 days from now, pooled money investment account has to make the decision. That's the governor, the controller, and myself on all of those that are in the pipeline, but the checks haven't yet been cut. That would be water and flood control, as well as schools and, yeah.
Assemblymember Gaines.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And this question is directed to Mac Taylor. Half of the states in the Union are currently suffering deficits. Leading Democrats are talking about stimulating the economy without increasing taxes. New York Governor David Paterson said last month, the higher we tax even the wealthy, the more we lose population and the less job creation there is. My question is, are you aware of any states other than California that are proposing to raise taxes?
I believe there are several that are considering them, but I think, Mr. Gaines, if we could get back to you, there's obviously groups like the National Conference of State Legislators who track this very closely, and we'd be happy to get back to you as to kind of what's on the table in other states.
Excuse me, Senator Leno. At Assemblymember Ammiano's desk, and his old desk.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Anyone who might like to take the question, we've already been looking at potential job loss with regard to any increase in taxes. Is there any comparison that can be made with the job loss related to cuts in programs such as education or health care or our social safety net?
Well, I think it was the treasurer who said earlier that it doesn't matter where you cut it, you affect on either side of the ledger. And if we lay off teachers, as an example, that's the example you raised, and certainly the proposal would require serious restructuring of a lot of school districts, so I think layoffs are a realistic prospect. If we lay off teachers, it's not just the job loss of the teacher that got laid off. There is a multiplier effect for any job or any expenditure in the economy. It's different for different types of people. Usually people at the lower to middle incomes tend to spend more of their money in the economy than those at the higher income. So assuming that it's laying off teachers, you would get a multiplier effect in the negative direction from them not having the money to spend. But you also get the same thing on the other side of the ledger, as we've all said. So there are negative effects on both sides.
Assemblymember Garrick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity and want to address my question to Mr. Taylor. It's regarding waste in government, and that backs up to my seatmate here this evening. President-elect Obama has talked about many of our needs, and one of them was meaningful cuts and sacrifices that we need to make our nation successful and strong again. He is recently quoted as saying, we cannot sustain a system that bleeds billions of tax dollars on programs that have outlived their usefulness or exist solely because of the powerful politicians or lobbyists and special interest groups. Many of us have argued that that is exactly what we should be doing here in California, and I'm talking about waste, fraud, and abuse, and that we have done little in this legislature recently to cut and make the necessary cuts as it relates to where we can find efficiency, unnecessary spending, and eliminate many of the wasteful programs. And I had a question, do you agree with that? And don't you think we should spend some more time focusing on a line-by-line analysis of the budget and analyzing some of the tough questions that we have to face and identifying the priorities of the California citizens and families and businesses that we have that are facing the economic hard times that besides this state is facing?
Well, clearly the answer is yes to that, Assemblyman Garrick. One thing I inherited from Liz Hill, my predecessor, was a bookshelf full of 1,000-page documents of our analysis going back to 1943. Those are basically filled with ideas and suggestions of ways to make government work more effectively and more efficiently. So whether we're talking about state categorical programs or things that we can do in the prisons to reduce costs, whether it's raising some fees on people that can afford to pay those, whether it's taking advantage of more federal money. Yes, I think there's a whole slew of suggestions that we should consider as we deal with this very difficult budget problem.
And let me just add, Mr. Garrick, the Pro Tem and I will both be responding to what you just mentioned in our House. I think you know that Assemblymember De La Torre is going to be starting a committee, and the Pro Tem will also have a new department that will look at exactly what you're talking about. Our final question is from Assemblymember Anderson.
This question is for Treasurer Lockyer. I'm particularly concerned with the elimination of the Rural Sheriff's Program. I serve on public safety, and that's important to me. Based on your prior experience as AG, it seems odd to recommend that the immediate discharge of thousands of parolees propose to allow inmates to be released from prison sooner. Do you support these proposed cuts to the frontline law enforcement and parole policy changes? And do you believe that that's going to be helpful to our state, or will that create more problems for us down the road? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm the banker that recommends you adopt policy cuts and taxes that get the job done. I have my own personal views about what programs are a higher priority, but that's not my job. And so obviously I had involvement in the programs you mentioned for law enforcement for a long time, but I defer to your collective judgments. It's hard, but I know thanks, by the way, you've been very good students today. As an old school teacher, thank you. But it's hard, but you're the ones, the 120 of you, are going to have to make these tough decisions to prioritize. I'd be happy to talk to you privately more about it, Senator.
Thank you very much. Let me just take the moment to thank the panel for a very, very sobering and important discussion. Give them a hand. And let me also thank Speaker Bass again for the idea and the invitation to participate in this unprecedented session, to the members for your intelligent questions, and mostly, I've never heard the Assembly floor so quiet. This was, I think everybody took this seriously as we should. Finally, just want to announce again that the Senate is going to meet in a few minutes to convene the Budget Committee as a 40-member committee. We will then break into subcommittees beginning Wednesday as we take the next week to week and a half to do everything we can to make a big dent in this budget problem. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Before you leave your desk, please, let me just once again thank the members of both the Assembly and the Senate, and also let me recognize former, just very briefly former, Assemblymember Sally Lieber, because this joint convention was actually her suggestion. So, Sally Lieber, thank you for joining us today. And we need for the Assembly members to stay at their seats. We have a few items of business to take care of. We will recess the joint convention, and without objection, the remarks the joint convention participants shall be presented in the Journal. I turn this session over to Speaker Pro Tem Lori Saldana.
Very well.